Howdy, this is Mr. Paul, and we're talking again today about A Course in Miracles. And today's topic is forgiveness. Just recently did a video about undoing fear and guilt and sin and accepting atonement. And that one actually kind of is about forgiveness. That is a good overview of a process, and it was kind of spontaneous. I wanted to talk specifically about forgiveness because it's a bit of a broader topic. So, sitting here, it's actually snowing, and it's the middle of April, so it's not very pleasant. But I'm braving the weather to be inside the car, away from the weather, so that I can talk to you. So. Forgiveness in A Course in Miracles is often thought to mean some kind of process that you do that takes you from a state of suffering and unforgiveness and gets you back to a happier state. But this isn't quite what the Course teaches. And it's been spread around as this very common idea of if you apply the Course, you're applying forgiveness or you're practicing forgiveness. And that's kind of only true in the sense that you are learning how to be forgiving, or you're sort of practicing as if like a new talent or a skill that you're learning how to be forgiving. As a kind of end result, and not really the process that you go through to get there. So what the Course says about forgiveness is that it recognizes that you have not sinned, and that in that recognition, all your sins are forgiven. That is the atonement. That is the maximum end result of all of the processes or whatever you go through to get there. It's the mind of the Holy Spirit. It is the state of mind that you have when you've finished all of your work and your undoing and your healing and your releasing and everything else. What the Course actually refers to as the processes that you go through is actually purification. It is a long-term process of purifying and clearing out and letting go and surrendering and healing and releasing old pain and correcting perception. And that purification process gets you up to eventually a state of mind which is forgiving. So if you remember that he who would not forgive must judge to justify his failure to forgive, when you're in a very, very forgiving state of mind, you don't perceive errors, you don't make errors, you proactively give love so that you will only experience love, and so that you're only reinforcing love in order to prevent you from sliding down a slope into error or making errors or causing errors. And so forgiveness really is a sort of an end result, or the healed, fully healed state of mind that results at the end of all of this purification work. And when you are being forgiving, it means that you are having a forgiving attitude. You overlook sin, and you don't believe delusions are real, and you're not buying into the dream, and you don't see bodies as separating people, and it's a very advanced state of mind. And it's a state of mind in which you recognize that there is nothing to forgive. So that's the same thing as the atonement. It's you have to have gotten past all of the forgiving of stuff to get to the point where you recognize that nothing's happened and you're still innocent, and therefore there is nothing to forgive because there is no sin. Forgiveness looks and recognizes that you have not sinned, and therefore affirms your innocence. That's in the atonement. That's the end state of being, where you're being forgiving towards people. You're in contrast to that, you would be unforgiving. So if you think about somebody who has an unforgiving attitude, they're kind of like mean and cruel and intolerant and hurtful and harmful. Being forgiving is the opposite of that. It really means you're very charitable, you're loving, you overlook sin, you don't believe in sickness, you don't believe in death, you're done with waking up, essentially. You're in this extremely purified state of mind where you look out with a forgiving way of looking, so that you only see the face of Christ, or you only see the innocence of everything, recognizing that there's nothing left to forgive. And that state of mind sort of sustains itself by proactively giving. Forgiving means giving before, or giving ahead of time, or giving, sort of proactively giving so that you don't ever have a lack. Lack is error. So by giving proactively and ahead of time, you don't produce states where there are lacks and emptiness and judgment and hate. So it's not that there's something there and you overlook it. It's that you actually don't make it. You don't implement errors by being forgiving. So forgiveness is the same thing as the atonement. I think Jesus says something like atonement and forgiveness and salvation are all names for the same thing. And this is something that I was totally not getting. I was confused about for years and years. I always thought that forgiveness was a process and the things that you do and apply and fix and so on. That was being forgiving, but really the Course doesn't teach that. It really says that forgiveness looks and is still and does nothing. It's a state of mind, a state of perception where you're done. It's where you've finished undoing all the confusion and all the perceptual errors and all the denial and everything ego, and have got yourself back to a perfect state of perceiving correctly, true perception. That's when you are forgiving. You're purely being forgiving. And if you think about how forgiveness recognizes that there's nothing to forgive, because anything that you thought had to be forgiven was actually a lie, is fiction. Being forgiving is a permanent state. It is a natural part of being a loving person. It's an attitude. It's a gracious, blessing, loving, healing kind of attitude that you have as the Son of God, and also God has the same attitude. A lot of people say God doesn't forgive because God doesn't recognize that you've done anything wrong. That's true, but God is still forgiving. He still has this mindset and this attitude of, I do not believe that you sinned. I see only your innocence. I love you and I bless you, and I don't make errors and I don't perceive errors, and therefore anything that you think you've done, you haven't done. That's God's attitude, and it's our attitude when we get back up to a state of mind that's in line with that. So God is always forgiving, but forgiveness means there is nothing to forgive. So that forgiveness causes there to not be a problem. causes there to not be a separation, causes there to be no mess that you've made that you got to clean up. So God is forgiving. Otherwise, you would have to say God is unforgiving, and God doesn't have an unforgiving attitude. He's not mean and angry and intolerant and hateful and short with people. He is forgiving, but it's a different kind of forgiveness that recognizes that there is not anything to forgive, and establishes that and maintains it. If God was to become unforgiving and stop being forgiving, he would become judgmental. He who would not forgive must judge, to justify why, to sort of explain why, well, I couldn't be forgiving because this person did this, and I'm not forgiving because that person attacked me against my will, or I was innocent and they did something to me. Those are unforgiving, judgmental viewpoints that God does not have, and we're not supposed to have. So forgiveness is natural health. It is a way of looking that only sees innocence. Just going to open the window a little bit here so I don't run out of air. There we go. And Jesus also says that when it is the privilege of the forgiven to forgive, and what that means is that when you have forgiven yourself of the things you didn't do, and get back to this state of forgiveness where you can see and recognize that you're sinless, you've forgiven yourself. You recognize the lack of a need to forgive yourself because you're already forgiven and forgiven. You've claimed and owned and received forgiveness in a sense, and now that you've received that love, that lovingness, you now can bestow it upon others, and you become able to forgive them. What this means, it doesn't mean, we're not talking about, oh, that person just fucked up and I have to forgive them for attacking me. It means you go up to the atonement, you get some forgiveness, you receive the forgiveness, you recognize your innocence, you see that there is nothing left to forgive, and therefore you've forgiven yourself, and now you're in a state of being forgiving. And in that forgiving state, you share the forgiving attitude with others, and it blesses them. And this is how you perform miracles, is that this is kind of what he's saying, that it's the privilege of the forgiven to forgive, or it's the privilege of the people who have gone to the atonement and received miracles for themselves, received love, to then give that love to others and to give miracles to others. Shut that one, it's too cold. So it then becomes your privilege that if you go receive miracles and you get to that state of being forgiven and there's nothing left to forgive, and you see your innocence because there's no sin, you're in a sort of a privileged position where you can now bestow that truth onto others and help others by forgiving them, i.e. recognizing that they're innocent, they haven't sinned, and only love is true about them, and the shining of that light, Holy Spirit says, blesses them. You've gone to the light yourself and become the light and a part of the atonement plan, and now you can shine onto others to overlook their sins, overlook their illusions of sickness, overlook their belief that they've done something wrong, only recognize the holiness and the innocence in them, and that heals them. So it's your privilege and your right to be able to do that once you get to the kind of mindset where you see that you are forgiven and there's nothing left waiting to be forgiven. Now, when you don't be forgiving, you enter into judgment, and then you have to attack. Holy Spirit says you enter into attack, and then you have to justify and explain why you can't be forgiving, by pointing a finger at somebody and saying, I can't be forgiving because that person just did that to me, and I'm a victim of this, and this is happening to me against my will. Those things like justify, I can't explain why I can't be forgiving, because I damn well should be upset about this, and it makes sense that I shouldn't feel happy about this, and I should be angry. That's an unforgiving attitude. And then what happens there is that you make errors. You're making an error by not being forgiving. You're implementing problems. You're creating illusions. You're going into judgment and attack. And that creates a big mess. And then you've got to clean up the mess. So then it starts to look like there is something that's gone wrong. There is a problem. Somebody is doing something to you. There is something that needs to be forgiven. There is something that's unforgiven. There is some kind of state of unforgiveness and hurtfulness. And you're suffering, and that's because you are not being forgiving. You're not overlooking all this stuff, and now we get into where you need to practice forgiveness, or you need to apply something, apply some course principles in order to get back to the truth, to get back to being forgiving all the time. Being forgiving isn't just one thing you do when you're done. It is a permanent state. It is a constant aspect of your nature as a loving person to always be forgiving. When you're not being that way, you go into unforgiveness, and then you produce errors. You're making perceptual errors, and now you need some correction. This correction is the purification process, where you've now got to kind of fix your errors. And you don't fix the errors by believing that there is something that has to be forgiven, and then going about thinking that you're doing forgiveness. What you're really doing is you're believing that forgiveness is needed because something is not forgiven, and then the ego jumps in and says, hey, this is not forgiven, therefore you need to do something about it. And so when your perception has gone into judgment, your mind literally goes back to front. Your perception turns around. Cause that was up here in your mind and effect that was out here switches places, and you now start seeing yourself as an effect, and you start seeing the world as a cause of those effects. Your perception goes backwards, and you start looking at the world as if somebody else is at fault, somebody else is doing something wrong, someone is the cause of the problem, they're the source of my upset, something's wrong with them, they're guilty, they're sinful, they're evil monsters, they're attacking me, blah, blah, blah. So then you'll have an encounter with somebody. Let's say you are at the store and the cash register lady is having a bad day, and she barks at you and judges something that you're wearing or something, and you become upset and angry and or whatever. And now you think that person out there is the one who's evil and sinful, because your perception doesn't recognize that it's you that's doing this. You've judged. Now you're in judgment, and now you actually perceive and believe and experience reality as if it really seems to be true that that person is the one who has the problem and not yourself, because you've projected all your sin onto them, you've displaced it, you're in denial, you've projected. So now they seem to be the only place where there's a problem, and you don't think you have any problem. You're totally convinced that you're totally innocent, and they're clearly wrong. Excuse me. And then I get stupid drainage when I talk and stuff. I've got to fix this. So you think that somebody's wrong, and you actually perceive the situation as if your mind gets into a state where you're kind of blind to any kind of thing about yourself being involved, or that you're contributing to why they look this way or anything, and you become really unconscious and in denial, so that it really looks to you as though there's a problem outside of you, and it's somebody else and some other issue in the world. Something else is causing a problem. You perceive it so convincingly, you're so sure that they are the one who's wrong. It seems to make total sense to you, seems to really be justified. And so then you think, well, I should be more forgiving here, so I'm willing to practice some forgiveness. And because you're starting at this point of totally flipped around perception, and the other person is the sinner, you think, I have to forgive them. They're the one who's wrong. I've got to do a forgiveness on Billy Bob, and I've got to do a forgiveness on my boss or whatever. I need to forgive them. And this is only the starting point of forgiveness, or applying correction, purification, because you're so convinced that that person is the problem and not you, that you think, okay, I've got to use the Course as a weapon to make that thing go away. I've got to forgive that asshole. I've got to find a way to sort of let that person off the hook. I've got to address that problem. I've got to, do something coursey to make that go away. That thing out there has to be changed. I've got to see them differently. I've got to fix the external problem. And people get really stuck in this because this is the state of mind that you're in at the beginning of undoing it. And so it looks like there's a problem out there. I've got to work on that problem. I've got to fix that person. I need to forgive that attacker. And if you stay there, you won't be able to do a full undoing of this problem, because you don't yet recognize it's got nothing to do with them at all. Your perception's back to front, and it needs to get twisted back around so you can perceive correctly the right cause and effect sequence. So you don't go about this forgiving as though somebody else really is the problem. I've got to forgive them. That's the problem that you're starting in. That's the wrong state of perception you're starting with. That way of perceiving has to change, so that you recognize they've got nothing to do with why you're upset, nothing to do with the symptoms that you have, nothing to do with how you feel, or emotions you're having, reactions you're having, thoughts you're having, any reason why you're afraid or feeling hurt. Absolutely nothing to do with other people. All forgiveness is self-forgiveness, because all attack is self-attack. So you gotta go from, I need to forgive that bastard fucking asshole who just did this thing and they're so wrong. That perception of them is wrong. That belief that they are wrong is wrong. that accusation or accusing them or condemning of them or finding them guilty or sinful is wrong. It's a mistake. Your perception is mistaken. You're in a mistaken way of perceiving, and you're not seeing correctly, and it's causing you to project and regard something else other than yourself as responsible for your happiness, or causing you effects and upsets. So your perception of the situation is wrong, not the person. Your mind has to get corrected so that you will let this person off the hook. And the purpose of your forgiveness isn't really to let them off the hook. They've got nothing to do with why you're upset and having a spaz and projecting blame all over the place. They're absolutely innocent and completely uninvolved in this insanity that you're having. You're completely unfairly projecting it onto them and trying to make them out to be the sinner when you really secretly believe that you are the sinner, and you're unconscious, you're in denial of that. So your perception has to get fixed so that you will stop believing that they even were the thing that you had to forgive. It's not them that you have to forgive. You never need to forgive other people. You only need to forgive yourself, because this is all about you've hurt yourself, you've attacked yourself, you've believed that you're a sinner, and you've become guilty, and then you've gone into denial. You've presented yourself as innocent and pretending that you didn't choose the sin, and it's projected out onto other people, and it's finding everybody else to be wrong, and you have this justified anger, which is mental illness. It's a state of believing that somebody else caused you to be upset. Somebody else is responsible for your happiness. Somebody else has made you suffer, or they're doing something wrong and you're right. It's got nothing to do with other people. You are in denial. You have a block to awareness, which is denial, and that block to awareness is stopping you from seeing that you're doing something to yourself. It's stopping you from seeing that you've caused self-harm, that you hate yourself, that you've attacked yourself, that you believe that you're sinful and you've condemned yourself to death. That is hiding underneath the facade of your persona, your innocence, your fake innocence. And that's where the real problem's hiding. It's back here behind layers of denial, that you believe you separated from God, you hated God, attacked him, became sinful, became guilty, and then you covered that over with I didn't do this bullshit lie, made yourself look innocent, so you could then deflect all of the cause and all the blame for the sin onto everything outside of you and be angry at them for what they did, to cover up your dishonest denial that you actually are the one who thinks you killed God. So it's a scapegoat. Every single person that you're ever angry at is a scapegoat for your self-hatred. So it's really not about forgiving them so much. I mean, you think that you're doing something to them by projecting stuff onto them and that you're attacking them, but they can't be attacked unless they attack themselves. You cannot hurt them with your accusations unless they're already hurting themselves. If they don't choose to comply with your attempt to accuse them of sin, they remain perfectly innocent. They are free from your free will. They're free from your insanity, free from your judgments and your attacks and your hatred and your projections onto them. If they don't choose to participate and believe it, they are completely invulnerable to what you're doing. So you're really going around sort of believing that you're finding everybody else guilty and they clearly are doing things wrong, when in fact that's a personal hallucination. It's a projection of your unconscious belief that you are a sinner, and therefore because you've got a belief in sin in your mind, you start perceiving sin wherever you look because it's in you. You can't see something that's outside your mind. The content is in you. Your idea of being sinful has not left your mind, and you're now seeing it everywhere you look, and you can't help that because it's in you. It's in your perception. You've got this block, this nasty attack thought in your mind, and it's making you see in an attacking way. Everywhere you look, you see this attack, but you see it in a disowned and disassociated way that makes you believe, because you did that on purpose to try to pretend that it doesn't apply to you. It makes it look like it's out there and it's only applying to somebody else. And it's really your stuff. It's your attitude about yourself. Whatever you think about other people is about you. You cannot find somebody to be guilty and have a reason to be angry at them without it being about yourself and being angry at yourself. You can't be in a state of love and be angry at the same time. So your perception has to get some correction, or you're going to go through a purification process because you're being unforgiving towards others and towards yourself. But the unforgivingness towards yourself is really the problem. It's got nothing to do with other people. You don't need to undo what you did to others because you have not done anything to others, not unless they do it to themselves. You have not had consequences. Your hurling of hatred at other people doesn't have to stick, not unless they put it there themselves. So it's not that you've got to now clean up the mess that you've made and the things that you've done to your brother. You haven't done anything. You haven't done anything to them, but you believe you have, and then you think, oh, I'm guilty of attacking my brother, so now I have to sort of heal the consequences, or I have to clean up the mess, or find them innocent so that they won't be attacked by me anymore. You didn't attack them at all. You attacked yourself. You attack yourself in your own mind. You have a hallucination of you're inside your own mind, attacking yourself by splitting off part of your mind and pitting it against the other part, and believing that one of these parts is you and the other part's not, and then the other part that you think is not you see outside of this other part because you have a split mind, and now you attack it with this part and try to get rid of it and see it overlaid on everybody. Because this part of your mind is split off from this other part that this part hates, you think that you're disassociated from this part and that it's not in you and it's not part of you and it's outside you. That it's outside of this part of your mind that you split. And this self, this evil self, is the enemy, and it's not yourself. And then you think it's in other people. It's not. It's still in your mind. You're hallucinating that you have an enemy that's really yourself. That's not really out there. It's in you. So you're having like a personal relationship with yourself. One part of you is attacking another part. Your mind has become split. You got a disassociation going on. You've got denial that is changed your sense of identity. So now you think I'm this identity, but not this identity. You're this, everything's good about me. I'm perfect and I'm loving and I'm innocent and I'm acceptable and worthy and stuff in a fake way, while this other part of you is hateful and sinful and guilty and dark and nasty. It's a shadow. This is your persona. This is your shadow. They're both inside your mind. Your persona attacks your shadow and tries to kill it because it's part of you. It's how your persona tries to destroy yourself by chopping off parts of your mind and getting rid of them and projecting them onto others. So I'll probably do a video about that at some point. So this is all happening inside you. You've got this war going on with yourself. You've got an enemy that's you, that you hate, and this other part of you that you think you don't hate. You see that in the world and think that it's got something to do with others. It doesn't have anything to do with others. So you're the one that's in a state of self-attack, and you're actually kind of, you talk to yourself like, you know how they say talking to yourself is the sign of madness? Well, this is madness because part of you splits off this other part of you and attacks it, and now has a kind of a relationship with it as if it's not yourself, like it's another being, another mind or another identity that you want to disassociate yourself from and separate from. And now you have a dialogue between the two parts where you see this nasty part projected outside of you, and you attack it and you hate it, and you see it in people and you see it in the world, and you think it is them because you can't see past it. And so now you accuse other people of your sinfulness, but you're really having kind of like a personal little private world where you're interacting with parts of your own self. And any attack that you seem to say towards others, you're actually talking about yourself to yourself. So like somebody comes along and they're angry with you or something, they think they are, and they use your name and they start calling you names or alleging things that you've done or making you sinful. They are not talking about you. They're talking to themselves. They're having a private one-on-one with themselves. It just kind of looks as though it's about you, and then you take it personally. If you've got some problems in your mind, you will take it personally, but if you don't, you won't. So if somebody's not sane and they have a split mind and they come to you and they start interacting with you, you got to realize that person is not aware of you. They don't see you how you are, and they are now interacting with themselves. They're insane. They're walking around talking to themselves as if you are part of them. And this is a split in the mind, and this is self-attack. They are attacking themselves. They're calling out for love. It's got nothing to do with you. And when you're doing this, other people don't have anything to do with you, but you're hallucinating that there's some part of yourself that's not you, that you think's in them, that is evil. And that's where you get into problems. That's your perceptual problem. So now you got to heal this. Correct this perceptual issue, which is a belief that you're separate, that you're split, you're divided within yourself, you're willing against yourself, you are opposing yourself, you've attacked yourself and tried to split yourself apart. This is a split mind, and a split mind is insane. It is against itself, and it's trying to kill itself. So it has two sides to it, and they're warring with each other and attacking each other and trying to destroy each other. And yet both sides are in one mind. They're in your mind. And the illusions that surround the two of them, that portray them as not like each other, as different to each other. This part's evil and bad and dark, and this part's light and people-pleasing and can do no wrong. Those are illusions, and they form identities, fake identities in your mind, where you think I'm this and I'm not this, and vice versa. Some people identify more with their shadow, more with their dark evil shit than they do with the light stuff. It's just a preference. It's no different. So you need correction and healing in order to go from these split parts of your mind back to wholeness, so that you get back to where you are seeing yourself as forgiven. When you see yourself as unforgiven, or you're being unforgiving, you have a split mind, and it will produce this state of disassociation and denial and projection. So at the base of this really is simply the truth that all attack is self-attack. You cannot attack anybody else. Nobody else can attack you. And therefore, forgiveness is self-forgiveness. It's got nothing to do with forgiving other people. You cannot forgive other people. You cannot, except in a healing way, where you apply a forgiving attitude and it heals somebody else. You should not try to, and it's really a waste of time trying to sort of get your mind to forgive somebody else, because you're sort of still holding on to the idea that it's real that they've sinned, that they're the problem, while simultaneously trying to find a way to forgive them and see them as innocent, but you're still keeping the idea that they're the problem. So you're sort of in a paralyzed state. It doesn't work. It doesn't produce a real change. You have to let go of the belief that somebody else is even involved in this problem. It's all to do with you. It's all it's all your own, what you've done to yourself. The secret to salvation is that I've done this all to myself. I'm responsible for everything I've chosen, everything I'm experiencing, everything that's happening. I'm doing it to me, not anybody else, not the world. And therefore, I need to forgive myself. I need to heal my relationship with myself so that I become whole again. And you get to that wholeness in the atonement after you've gone through a big, long process of purification and healing and releasing and owning up to this truth that you've found yourself sinful underneath your projections, and letting yourself off the hook, finding yourself to be guiltless, finding yourself to be sinless, looking within. What if you looked within and saw that there is no sin? You look within and recognize that you have not sinned in reality, so you must still be innocent. Your sin has not produced any real consequences, so it can't cause anything, hasn't caused anything, so you have not sinned, therefore you're still innocent. And that's where you're getting into the atonement, where you're accepting the truth that in truth you have a whole mind, you don't have anything to forgive, you are forgiven, you finished forgiving. This is the completion of forgiveness, and now you're being forgiving, and now you're able to be forgiving towards others. It means being loving towards others. You can be giving them a wide berth, giving them the benefit of the doubt, letting them off the hook, not accusing them, not judging them, just blessing them with a recognition of their innocence that is also yours. So, years ago I had a really massive forgiveness problem where I did something that I thought I sinned. I was only 11 years old, and I was playing with some friends, and we had made We took some thin garden canes, really thin, like green things, and we tied some wool, a piece of string between the two ends, and made a kind of a pretend bow and arrow kind of thing, and took another one of these little thin sticks, and we were sort of flicking them around and sort of pretending that we were doing that or whatever, and got into where we started to aim them towards each other, and we were sort of getting into some irresponsible behavior, potentially dangerous behavior, where I was sort of shooting it at my sister's feet and sort of having power over people a little bit, not realizing that it was potentially dangerous, and let go of this thing, and it went and actually hit one of my best friends in the eye and damaged his eye, and he went away screaming and had to go to hospital and eventually had to have his eye removed. And so most people, you know, you might be watching this and thinking, you asshole, Paul, how can you do that? It was a mistake, and I believed that it was a sin, regardless of anybody else, and naturally, because of the way people like to scapegoat, everybody in society wanted to take the opportunity to find me guilty and to use the opportunity to sort of get some of their guilt and sin out onto me by believing, okay, Paul's sinned and he's done this terrible thing, and even though it was an accident and he didn't really mean to hurt the person, he must still be this evil sinner. And so everybody started abusing and bullying and being verbally abusive and physically abusive and rejecting me, and even friends and family members and neighbors and parents of other children all got into this and ostracized me, and I became very, very withdrawn and ashamed and guilty and depressed and hopeless and unworthy, and kind of wanted to die. And that's kind of what happens when you think you've sinned. You start really believing, and this wasn't like other people were putting this onto me. I was agreeing with them that this was a terrible thing that I'd done, and that therefore I was very sinful, should be guilty, should be ashamed, should be punished, should suffer, should not be loved. These are all beliefs that I set in place. And the experience of everybody else joining in and doing my bidding, in a sense, by attacking me, got to a point where I felt that there was no one on my side in the whole world, and I was totally alone and lonely and isolated, and started to become mentally ill, in a sense, because I believed that I'd hurt this person and that their family was enraged at me, and I started to believe that they had every right to be, and that they had power over me. They were going to get revenge at some point. Had to be afraid of them constantly living in fear of people suddenly spontaneously choosing to use this against me, to attack me. Couldn't go anywhere or walk anywhere without fear and guilt, like I had a big target on my back. And constantly anxious and unhappy and afraid of punishment and being punished by some people who took it upon themselves they said that they were righteous in their vengeance, like somehow they had the right to hurt me because of what I'd done. They thought that somehow that gave them a right to be justified in anger and to attack me. So I became a shadow of my former self and lost all sense of wanting to be loved, and didn't think I was worthy or deserved it, and didn't allow my parents to love me, didn't allow other people to love me, didn't want to have a girlfriend, didn't think I deserved it. Felt very ashamed and guilty and unforgivable. And because of the way that the mind displaces externally and your perception shifts around and you become very deluded about cause and effect being reversed, I would see all this causality outside of me, what people do to me, what the family's going to do to me, the rejection that comes from them, the things that they're punishing me with that I need to be afraid of. And so I put all this power into their hands and became very powerless and hopeless, and started to feel like life was coming to an end and I couldn't see a way to get past it, and felt just shit as hell. Life became dark. The light went away, and I felt like before long I was probably going to have to die, because it really felt like I was denying myself so much that the will to live was in question. And my mind became sick in that way, because I saw and believed that there was going to be this right of others to attack me and to do something to me against my will. I started believing that I was going to be, or was being, involved with aliens, alienated people who were able to come through the walls, and that they were coming to take me off, and they were going to visit me, and they were have these terror experiences, and wanting them to give me a message, and thinking that they were doing this to me against my will. I couldn't stop them. I became very afraid of this sort of this idea of these invasive, not asking permission, justified, very alienated, separated off, threatening, scary things, monsters that were going to be doing things to me, and that they were. I started having dreams where I started imagining that they were and stuff. And it didn't help that I started to believe that these things happened to people, and I started reading about abductions and things and getting all bent out of shape about it. That went on for several months. And in a sense, I was insane. My mind was just so backwards. And so I didn't think that I deserved to be forgiven. And because I was surrounded with all these people that were not willing to forgive me, and I believed that the family of the person and the person himself, if the only way that I would get to be forgiven would be if they would let me off the hook by forgiving me, and sort of saying, I had this sort of fantasy that I was going to go visit them and they were going to say, okay, we forgive you now, and that would heal it. It was like hanging from a thread. So lived for years kind of under the thumb of that, in this sort of wishful thinking that I was going to somehow one day be forgiven. Nobody was showing me forgiveness. Everyone was being unforgiving. Everybody and their uncle wanted to get in on this opportunity to scapegoat and to point a finger and accuse and say, hey, you're a bad person, you're dangerous and stuff, and very isolating, very, very, very unpleasant experience. And what I had to learn at some point was I could not tolerate the sense of unworthiness and unlovability and guilt and shame that I had put on myself, and agreed with others that what they were doing was acceptable, or that I should be attacked, or I should not stand up for myself, or that I didn't have any kind of a right to defend myself, and had orchestrated attacks with my mind that way. Even though I believed I didn't want them, I still was making it happen to myself. I was hurting myself. And so I had to realize in the depths of darkness that you kind of go from like a state where you're like realizing no one's forgiving me, everybody's being unfair, I'm being mistreated, everybody hates me, whatever, to go from there to slightly twist that to where you can say, because if it gets really extreme, you get to a point where it's like it's very, very obvious that people don't forgive you and they hate your guts. You see the ego at work, and all of a sudden it might dawn on you that if they're not ever gonna forgive me, and they seem so disinterested in being forgiving and loving toward me, fuck them. I am going to find myself innocent. I'm going to give myself the right to choose that I am no longer guilty and sinful. I had to do this. I got to a point where I couldn't stand feeling so shit that I had to not only recognize that other people were being sinful, or they were being scapegoaty and judgy and attacky, and that was something was wrong with them. It wasn't all about me, and that I had a right to claim my innocence. Like, how long do I have to suffer with this? How long am I going to go for years and years feeling so unworthy and so hated and not deserving love? Couldn't stand the state of it. Had to really find a way to sort of try to heal some of this pain, to try to be free of some of this guilt and shame and sense of sin. And so it sort of began a healing journey that was very long and very deep. This really had affected me in a huge way. And I know some people think, well, okay, somebody hurts somebody and does a sin, and therefore fuck them, and they're a bad person, and they should be hurt and in prison, or they should be tortured or punished, or that is extremely unforgiving, and it's very insane as well. And in the face of that, you have to say, no, that's not healthy. You know, that's not a valid, justified judgment. Everybody got into this attitude towards me that they were justified in being angry, that it gave them some kind of a right to attack and hurt me. I had to see past that they did not have this right, and that they were just being egotistical assholes who wanted to jump on the opportunity to make me a target, to make themselves look better. They were trying to somehow get rid of their sinfulness by saying, hey, point a finger at Paul, he's the one who did this, let's all attack him, to make themselves not be noticed for how egotistical they are. So at some point you have to realize even if you've sinned, no matter what you did, no matter how extreme, if you're a criminal, if you even got locked up in prison for it, if you're doing a life sentence, if you've been committed to death, no matter how many people you've hurt, no matter how murderous you were, no matter how much you think you've done something that's so terrible that God could not forgive you, it's not true. And this is a very difficult lesson for many people to consider, that even people who seem very evil are sons of God. They do deserve to be forgiven. They do deserve to be loved. They need love. They do deserve to be found innocent by God and everybody else's opinion that they are such a terrible bad being that doesn't deserve forgiveness. That's the judgment and the hate of the person putting that onto the criminal to scapegoat them and to try to alleviate their own self-hatred. So you have to realize at some point there's kind of a flip. There's a state of decision between, do I deserve to be forgiven, or should I be condemned forever to suffer and be unhappy forever and ever because of what I did? Is there some way that this is forgivable? Would God forgive this? What I did was pretty bad, even though I didn't really mean to hurt the person. It still was a pretty serious event, and it had a lot of consequences and destroyed my life and very significantly affected his life. So you have to go through this entire healing process of purification to get yourself to where you can say that you're forgiven. It took me 25 years of suffering and unhappiness and depression and self-hurt and believing that I shouldn't be loved and isolating myself and withdrawing from society and feeling alienated and attacked by everyone all the time, even if they weren't doing anything, feeling like a guilty target, walking around the world being self-conscious and judged and hated, which I was doing to myself. You have to really learn that you do deserve to be forgiven, that God is an unconditionally loving, forgiving being. And even if you made a very, very bad mistake, it is not a sin. It is only an error. The Course in Miracles is quite clear about the difference between sin and error, or errors and mistakes. That errors can be corrected and sin can be reversed. It can be healed. You can heal it. And you do deserve to get back to a place of innocence. Even if somebody's a terrible war criminal, killed and murdered 6,000 people, whatever, even if you're Hitler, you still deserve to get back to heaven. You still deserve to be found innocent. You still are forgivable. You still can be loved. You deserve to be loved. You can be loved, and you can find a way to love yourself again. Even if you're riddled with sin and guilt, there's no reason why you can't. And anybody that says otherwise is not telling you the truth. Anybody who tries to keep you in prison and keep you restrained and down and suffering and constantly being in a state of pain and misery, they're not loving people. You don't need to listen to people who are not being loving towards you as if their opinion is important. They're full of shit. They are just as much full of sin as you are, and they're trying to put it onto you. So This is a lot of difficult stuff to learn. It goes against society's norms of how most people act and behave toward each other and find each other guilty and want to condemn. So I had to go through this process of digging out all this pain, crying for years, releasing all of the aspects of it and going through various healing modalities and trying to undo it and clear it out and explain it to myself why I was just an innocent child who didn't know what he was doing and all this stuff. Rationalizations to try to say, well, if I reframe it this way, maybe I can see myself as innocent. Didn't fully work, because I even found out that this person in a past life, I remembered somehow this person was an American Indian with me as an American Indian, and on horseback, this person shot me in the eye with an arrow. And that was very revealing, because there's karma. So in this lifetime, almost, I was supposed to shoot this person in the eye with an arrow in order for them to experience the effects of the karma that they set up in the past, to allow them to learn why they shouldn't have done that to me. That kind of lets me off the hook, except that now I have to also forgive the other side of the coin, where now I've experienced what it's like to hurt somebody and need to learn how that can be forgiven. But even learning that did not heal this thing in me. It was not until, because if you still believe it's happened, if you think you've sinned and something actually happened, there really was an event, and you did something in this world, any event that occurs in this world is sin. Every single thing that occurs is an idea of sin. Me sitting in this car effectively is a sin. And if you believe that it's happened, that literally the event occurred in time, there was somebody that hurt somebody's eye, or whatever you did, whatever the sin was, if you believe it occurred, you will not be able to let it go. And I could not let it go. No matter how much I healed this and forgave it and undid it and let out the pain and corrected the perceptions and let myself off the hook and found a way to become innocent again in spite of other people still hating me and giving myself permission to be forgiven or forgivable, it still didn't. I couldn't get rid of this little nugget of guilt and being triggered and reacting because I still believed it happened. The first time that I finally realized how to get to atonement and accepted that it did not happen, it did not occur in reality, nothing real has been threatened, nothing real has been hurt, that person has not really been hurt, I did not really shoot that person with an arrow, and they did not hurt me in a past life, and the sin did not occur, has had no real consequences in reality or in truth, in God's truth. Therefore, that event did not happen other than in a dream. And because it was in a dream, my innocence did not get affected. My innocence is still perfect in God. In His eyes, He still finds me worthy of love. Therefore, I can let go of believing that something happened or that there was a sin. There was not a sin. That is the core root that keeps that in you, and I finally got that fucker out. after 25 years of pain and suffering, finally accepted that I am innocent and I do deserve love and I am forgiven, and no matter what anyone else believes, that's their insanity, nothing to do with me at all, because it was only really a setup for my way of attacking myself. I hurt myself, not the other person, and by healing that and accepting the atonement on this issue, I finally found freedom, and it got fully healed, cured. It's gone. It is not in me. I cannot be affected by it. I am not triggered by it. I don't have any of the consequences of it. Holy Spirit has healed it. I am free of it. I am innocent again. Thank God for that. Because this is what you deserve. If you think you've sinned, you deserve to be forgiven. You deserve to be let off the hook and restored to innocence, restored to love. This is God's will, that you not be found guilty. God does not judge. God doesn't find anyone sinful. We only do it to ourselves. This is the secret to salvation. I was finally able to heal that terrible torture by accepting the truth that I have not sinned. It didn't even occur in reality. Reality hasn't been hurt and affected. That person, as my brother, is holy and innocent. They are Christ. They are perfect and innocent and invulnerable and cannot be hurt. So I cannot really have hurt them. Which means that I am forgiven. So now that part of me, as I accepted that, Jesus said to me for the first time ever, now you will be able to perform miracles. Because I had accepted a miracle. This was a miracle to undo this horrendous body of pain and suffering, which wasn't doing anybody any good. It doesn't help anybody to be guilty. The world is not made a better place by you being ashamed and suffering. The world is not a better place by you being unworthy and unforgivable. Nobody's helped by you being guilty of anything. If you do something wrong and you get into guilt because you think that that's somehow atoning and you're making it up to somebody, that's bullshit. You are being selfish and you're trying to stay guilty. It doesn't help anybody to stay guilty. You can only be helpful when you are being loving and forgiving, and you can't get to that unless you let go of the guilt. You have to see yourself as worthy again, free of the guilt, free of the sin. Having not sinned, you're still innocent. And now you are helping the person that you think that you hurt. You can now give them miracles and heal them and cancel the effects of whatever you think you did, and bring restoration, atonement for what you think happened. You erase it from the dream. So this is what I had to go through, and this is how I learned that you can go from being horrendously sinful to being perfectly innocent, and nobody can stop you. Nobody has the right to take that from you, and you should never give that away to other people to let them decide for you whether you're innocent or not. In God's eyes, you are innocent now. You always have been, and you always will be. So, forgiveness leads to complete healing and cure of all sin. Nobody's supposed to stay sinful. Nobody's supposed to be punished for being sinful. Nobody deserves it. You only deserve love. Everyone deserves to be loved. We're all loved by God. There is no other truth. This is A Course in Miracles. So, return to being forgiving. Recognize that you're forgiven. There's nothing left to forgive. You have atoned. You've accepted your innocence. You're allowed to. It's not a crime to believe that you're innocent when